So, well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I am surprised and pleased to be out here. And so if you're expecting a lecture, this is not going to be a lecture because this has been a long day. And so this will kind of be a talk with some information that's in there. Do want to say thank you. You'll be so many places. And for people who are watching online, it's so good to have you. And glad that you're watching from the comfort of your home or wherever that you're watching. And I really want to thank Baker Bookhouse for inviting me out to do an author talk. This was a wonderful process of writing this book, and I enjoy talking about it. You'll see in a minute that it reflects a lot of my life and my work. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that I am only half of the dynamic duo that has written this book. My co-author is, I lovingly call the other Michelle. So that drove our publisher crazy because we couldn't figure out what to call us because it was Michelle and Michelle, spelled exactly the same way. She lives in Ohio, and we had a blast writing this book. And I'll talk just a little bit about that process as well as a little bit about the book. So I brought myself notes just to make sure that I keep exactly on track because I can get so caught up talking about diversity that I can go all evening. And I think my husband wants me home tonight, so we will not do that. What I'm going to do is I will talk a little bit about how we came about writing this book, what's important to us about this book, some of the takeaways. I'll read a couple of passages that I really like, and then also we'll leave some time for some Q&A at the time. So if you have some questions, and then we'll be signing books at the end. So first of all, just kind of who am I? My name is Michelle Loyd Paige, and my day job, the location of my job for the last 37 years, if you can believe that, is at Calvin University. But beyond that, there are other things that I do. So at Calvin University, my job is the Executive Associate to the President for Diversity and Inclusion. It's a cabinet level position, and my job is to oversee the strategic initiatives regarding diversity and inclusion at Calvin University. I was a professor of sociology, still a professor of sociology, but I'm not teaching in the classroom. I tried that, and yeah, I can't do this administrative work and teach at the same time. It's all good for about the first 3 weeks, and then it's like, oh, I got to go to class. Yeah, I got a grade, and so we don't follow through with that. But anyway, and the other parts, I'm also ordained clergy. I am not on the ministerial staff. I changed churches in the middle of the pandemic. So getting used to a new church, and they're getting used to me. It's going well. I'm in the preaching rotation, but I'm not officially on staff. And I don't think I want to be officially on staff because it's not as fun. So there's the have tos, and right now it's I get to. I have 3 adult children. My husband and I have 3 adult children. We have 1 adorable granddaughter who lives out in California, which makes me think about retirement a little bit more because then I can spend more time out in California with her. My husband and I live in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Proud to be residents of Muskegon Heights. And yes, I really do drive every day here to Grand Rapids. That's because the president has failed to get me the helicopter that I have requested. So I might be good, but I'm not that good. I'm not good enough to have that. In thinking about this project and how did I get here, if I look at over my life, my father was career military in the Navy and in the Army, but most of the time in the Navy, about 20 years. And we've moved around quite a bit. I was born in San Diego, have lived outside of the United States, Germany, Puerto Rico. I know is a commonwealth of the United States, but have had that kind of experience living in different places and living in different kind of communities. So crossing cultures, crossing boundaries has been something that I have lived into and experienced. And then went to graduate school, and in going to graduate school, studied sociology, should back up, graduated from Calvin University, then Calvin College with a degree in sociology. Thanks very much to this man over here, my favorite professor of all time. And went on to graduate school at Purdue. All my work has been in sociology, and I've always been fascinated about studying what people do when they get together, and not so much individuals, but what happens in those trends. And I was especially fascinated in topics of diversity and topics of race. For me, learning, I always knew that I was Black. There was no doubt about that, mostly because there were always young classmates who were not Black who would remind me in unkind ways that I was Black, right? So that's always been a thing. And my parents always strive to instill a pride and a knowing about who we are, that we are African Americans. But it wasn't until my family moved back stateside that really understood what did it mean to be Black. I knew I was Black, but what did that mean? So this process of learning and understanding who I was and navigating different cultures and contexts, and coming to terms with what place means and ancestry means and all of that has been a part of my journey. And when you combine that with teaching, with education, and you combine that with helping students, undergraduate students, better understand diversity, better understand inequality, better understanding who they are in the world, and then leaning in to help my university, help my college better understand how to define and better understand and work with diversity and inclusion, it seemed natural that a book would pop out, right? I have been doing this work for quite some time in this role for about 9 years. I'm finishing up 9 years in this role. I was a dean for multicultural affairs for about another 9 years and a professor of sociology for the rest of the time. And in that, people, because I've been doing this so long, and Calvin is a part of the Coalition of Christian Colleges and Universities, because I've been doing this so long, and I have worked with the CCCU as a resource leader for their Multi-Ethnic Leadership Development Institute. It's not uncommon any given week that I get a call from someone to say, hey, we're trying to improve our diversity efforts. Someone recommended you because you've been doing this for a while. Can I bend your ear for a minute? Can I just have a little bit of your time? And it's always a pleasure working with people that really want to do this. And I understand that we are all in different places along the journey, but I can only be in so many places at one time. And my friend Michelle, she and I met 12 years ago, and we met at a little training cohort for diversity professionals led by Brenda Salter. We hit it off great. And we jokingly said, we should write a book one day because we hit it off so well. Fast forward 10 years later, she gives me a call and she says, remember when we said that we were going to write a book one day? And it's like, yeah, that was funny. Yeah, we said that some 10 years ago. She says, well, I need to write a book. I need to write that book now. Because she was leaving Christian higher education. She was burning out. And not only was she burning out, but her doctor had kind of given her an ultimatum. You need to change your lifestyle. You need to get away from this kind of work or you're going to die. She said, I'm leaving the stress associated with doing this work in higher education. And I want to have a book in hand when I begin doing my consulting work. 3 writing retreats later, long weekends that were a whole lot of fun, and the book was finished. So we thought it was finished. We shopped it around to a couple of publishers. The first one said, we expanded a little bit. We did that, and they said no. And then we found Abilene Christian University Press, and they said, perfect. Just double the size. It's like, oh, you've got 2 talkative people. We can double the size. That's not going to be a problem. And it was really, it was a very fun collaborative process I have heard horror stories from some others, like, oh, writing a book with someone is so hard. This was so fun, so much fun that next month she and I are getting together to start on our second book project together. So stay tuned for that. I would tell you a little bit what it's like, but that would spoil the surprise. So you're just gonna have to keep up with us and how we're doing. And I think, oh, and I should say for Michelle and I, our approach to writing this book, we use the lens that we're your big sisters. Like, we have been doing this work for a while. We have a heart for diversity professionals, particularly within Christian higher education, who are just coming into the pipelines and wanting to really encourage them, help them to glean from some of the lessons that we have learned so that they don't have to experience some of the pain points that we have experienced, so that they could know that, no, you're not crazy. That is a thing. And you need to do something about that. It's okay. And that you're not alone. So this book is our attempt to put into words and to put these words into the hands of young diversity professionals, as well as people who've been doing this for a while. So, but this book is in 3 sections. If you have not read the book yet, it's in 3 sections. The first section was our first, when we thought we had the book complete the first time, which is for the diversity professional. In it we share our story because we wanted to be honest and vulnerable about this journey. And we thought it would be helpful for people to be able to see themselves, to see what was possible, because although we share some of the pinch points that we have experienced, we share a lot of the opportunities and a lot of joy and satisfaction doing this work, because she had been in Christian higher education for more than 20 years before she left, and I'm going on my 38th year of being in Christian higher education, so we have some time with this. The middle section is for what we call the outliers, the co-conspirators, and the allies. And these are for the people who say they want to help the person who was leading diversity efforts. And we're careful to use a very wide definition of the diversity professional, because not everyone who's trying to lead diversity efforts has the title, has diversity, equity, or inclusion in their job title. Sometimes it's the English professor who just wants something to get done. Sometimes it's a student program director who's wanting to get things done. So we keep a big tent so that we can bring everybody in. But there are people at campuses and churches and businesses who are trying to walk alongside that. And my favorite part of that section is the thanks but no thanks chapter. The chapter about people who say they're trying to help, they're not helping. And so that was a kind and gentle way to say, check your motivations and make sure the help that you're offering really is help. I can't tell you how many times people thought they were trying to help me, speaking truth to power, and all they did was make my job a whole lot harder, because there's a whole lot I have to dig up and make right and get going in the direction that I want. And then the last section of the book is for the organizations. And organizations is any organization that is trying to do this work from a Christian foundation. So it could be Christian higher education, it could be a nonprofit, it could be business, it could be any of these types of organizations or churches. And so for that, we are very pleased to be able to offer examples of how this can work across different types of businesses and organizations if they have a heart and a desire to improve their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And in that last chapter, we offer a model that we've come up with that's called the SHIFT model, and how to advance, how to shift, how to move the needle on diversity efforts, right? And as we are, looking at why we felt it was important, why this time. So there was the reality that Michelle wanted to bring this, playful banter to life because she was moving into a different chapter of her life. But then there's also the reality of our times now. Our diversity numbers are growing, and they're growing much more quickly than we had thought some 20 years ago. We're looking at the census and changing demographics. Not only nationally are we becoming more and more a nation where the people that we have called the minorities are going to become the majority of people altogether. We're already seeing that happen in our schools, especially in our public schools and major areas. We're already seeing that happen. If we're looking at where the growth in our churches is happening, it is happening because of our new ethnic members are joining. That's where our church growth is happening. So if we're looking, and we're becoming much more connected, even more connected globally. So our engagement with people who are different from ourselves, our neighborhoods are going to be looking different. Our churches are going to be looking different. Our schools are going to be looking different. It's important to recognize that diversity isn't coming. Diversity is already here, especially if we look beyond just racial and ethnic diversity. If we're looking at the other aspects of diversity, all the ways something different. Diversity is already here, and we have a choice to make. Do we embrace that diversity? Do we celebrate it? Or do we try to keep things the way they were some 20 years ago, the way they were 30 years ago? I'm hoping, we're hoping that people will want to embrace this diversity. However, even though that's our hope that people will want to embrace this, we take a look around at what's going on. There's some things that make us really uncomfortable. For us, it gives us even more conviction that now is the time to have this kind of book. Now is a way to get this book into people's hands so they can have at least a starting point in digging into these efforts. One of the things we cite 4 things or talk about, we don't talk about these 4 things in the book, but when we do talks, these are the 4 things we talk about. One is this heightened sense of urgency and awareness. Things were messed up before the summer 2020, with the summer 2020, it heightened the awareness and the sense of urgency that something has to be done. It's the summer of racial reckoning. No longer hide the fact or disguise this fact that there are some severe and deep racial divides in our country. We see with this increased awareness and this increased sense of urgency at the same time, we're seeing increased resistance. In other times in our history, in US history, we have seen some kind of crisis and people coming together, right? 9/11 was a crisis, people come together, didn't matter who you are, everybody was trying to find an American flag to fly, they were making it up because we are together. Somehow in the summer of 2020, that did not happen. We were not coming together to say, this is not acceptable. We are united. So we hear voices. We can say it's this rise, this increased presence of white nationalism, this extreme right that is spinning a narrative that is driving us to a deeper and deeper divide, right? And we see that not just in the streets of the world, we see it in our churches as well. We hear that same voice coming from some of our Christian congregations. And that's having an impact on our Christian witness. Who are we? The world is watching, the nation is watching, our neighbors are watching. Who are we as Christians? And sometimes I'm a little nervous about the message that is being sent. And then also institutions and organizations are being called into greater sense of accountability. So many people during the summer 2020 were, that was the golden time. If you were anyone who had anything to say about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're hired as our chief diversity officer, right? You're hired. Yeah, that lasted for a hot minute because it got in and found out just because you hire someone doesn't necessarily mean that the person A knows what they're doing, or B, that things are going to change just because you have one person to do your work. But there is greater institutional critique, greater sense of accountability accountability. So yes, people are saying, what are you doing? How are you standing up? And then the other trend that we see that, again, causes us to think that this book is so timely is a deep concern for the mental and emotional well-being of people who are trying to do this work, as well as people who are being impacted by all the divisions that we see. Chief diversity officers, we saw this increase in 2020, and we're seeing a mass exodus right now, where people are saying, you know what, it is too hard. People are saying they want to change, but as soon as we try to implement change, try to get to those structural changes, we don't find the cooperation, we don't find the support that we want. And so that's why we have in that latter section, what do you need to sustain? You can say you have commitment, that's good, have a shared commitment, but what do you need to do to sustain that commitment? So it's not just a quick photo op, look, we hired this new person, but nothing is changing. So we see these four things at play that cause us to think that this book was the right book at the right time. And it's an invitation to begin the conversation. We know that this is not comprehensive by any stretch of imagination, and that there's a deeper work that needs to happen. But we have to also find ways for people to enter into the conversation and to have a wide view of what it takes to move the needle. It takes the people who are in charge to lead this effort. It takes people working with us, and it also takes organizational commitment as well. And I'm going to read an excerpt from the book. That's what I'm going to do. And this first one I want to read, again, in looking at why is this important and why this time. Very early in the book, this is on page 21, and this comes in the section where we say diversity matters to God. And for Michelle and I feel that this is very important. We do this work not just because the demographics are changing. We do this work not just because we are seeing increased resistance or that institutions are being held accountable or being called upon to be accountable. But we enter into the space, we do this work because we really believe that diversity matters to God. When we look at God's creative process and see all the diversity that's there. But we also believe that it doesn't just stop with diversity. Diversity matters to God, but it's not diversity just for the sake of pretty pictures, but it's so that all things can be reconciled with God. All things and all relationships. I'm going to read this last paragraph on page 21. The position we take in this guidebook is that diversity is something to be pursued and celebrated. Granted, the pursuit of diversity is messy work, but it is good work. Study after study has demonstrated the educational benefits of the presence of diversity in higher education, in a democratic society, and in the business sector. Diversity is not something that is coming. Diversity is already here. We see it in the latest census reports and population forecasts. The proportion of those identifying solely as white is decreasing. The fastest growing churches around the world are ethnic churches. But the value of diversity is more than just reflecting the demographic changes to national and global populations. Because you can have diversity in numbers, but have a toxic environment and not reap the benefits of diversity. When diversity is pursued, celebrated, and leveraged, the benefits of diversity become more evident. And that is something that, unfortunately, I think a number of institutions, be it churches, be it businesses, for-profit or nonprofit, higher education, they're finding out that if you do all this hard work of bringing in diversity, having that compositional diversity, right? So you count, you have this many people in this category, this many people in this category, you do all that work, and you don't take note of, is there inclusion? Because you can have diversity, you can have the pretty picture, but if no one feels like they belong, or that group of diverse people that you brought in don't feel like they belong, they're not gonna stay. If you are leveraging the diversity that you have, you're bringing people's ideas so people can bring their whole self, not just a different colored face, not just a different gendered body, but they're bringing their whole selves, their culture, their ideas, their thoughts, and it's valued and celebrated. And you can leverage that. You will reap the benefits of diversity. You'll reap the greater productivity. You'll reap the greater sense of belonging for everyone, not just for those diverse people. So inclusion is bringing those voices around the table and leveraging that. But we say we need even more than that. We need equity. We need to make sure that not only are you hearing my voice, not only have you brought me in, you're hearing my voice, but my experience, my chances of being promoted are the same as yours, right? If we're doing good work, there is equity. We have what we need to flourish. So we're looking at equity. What do we need in order to flourish? In order to set up an environment, we have to take note that people are different, and sometimes people need different things. So a really quick example of what equity might look like that's very practical, and any woman in the room who has ever flown will appreciate this. The bathrooms in airports have to have a whole lot more stalls for women than they have for men, or any stadium arena or anything like that. Why? Because women sit down all the time. So we need more stalls to sit down than men who just need to, I don't know what you're doing there, but you don't need as much as we do, right? And they have shown that. You can see that in some of the older stadiums or whatever, right? There's always this long line, and even in airports, long line outside of the female bathroom, not so much in front of the men's bathroom. And so someone one day got the bright idea, well, let's give them more stalls to the females. Thank you very much. That's an example of equity. That's an example of people having what they need when you flourish. Okay. And I think I'm watching time, and I do want to offer some time for you to ask some questions. But another section that I'm very pleased with and happy that we included was also earlier on in the book. We're talking about what this is about and what this is not about. We wanted to be very clear what our book was about. And so on page 26, I'm giving you all the good information that's in the front of the book. We wanted to be clear what this book was not about. And that comes out of our experience as being diversity professionals and people often assuming a particular agenda when they find out that this is kind of what that we do. And so we wanted to be clear that this book, in talking about our sharing our challenges within Christian organizations, that we're not trying to bash the church. We are both firmly committed to the church. And it's because we love the church so much that we're wanting to offer a loving critique. We also wanted to say that this book is not meant to be a comprehensive guide. We're not trying to write another dissertation. What we're trying to do is provide a starting place for people, because we have seen the books that are out there, and some of them, quite honestly, are so thick and so academic that you read the first chapter and say, I give up. I'm tired of reading all the footnotes. This is too big. These are words that are way too big. We said, you know what, let's just do it like a book like we would want to read. Something that is inviting, not that comprehensive, but giving a starting place, because everyone needs a place to start, and that's what we need to do. So that's what this book is not. And then we talk about what we hope for this book, or what this book is. And we identify again for these three populations, these three categories that we're interested in. It's the diversity professionals, for the outliers, the allies, the co-conspirators, and for the organizations. And we thought that if we begin early in the book to say what we hope people will get out of it, that they will receive it as an invitation to say, start where you are. If you think that you are want to know more about what it means to help a diversity professional, start at the second chapter, start at the second section of this book. You get out of it. If you're an organization wanting to know, are you on the right track, start at the back of the book. If you're a diversity professional, start at the front of the book. we invite you to read the whole book, but there are different places for you to begin, and there are different outcomes that we want you to see. So that's my kind of nutshell of the book. It was fun to write. It really is recommendations and guidance for Christian organizations, but it's not just for Christian organizations. Any organization will be able to find information, guidance, recommendations, principles to help them in their diversity efforts as well. So I will take a breath and invite questions at this. Yes.
Do you report directly to the president of Calvin University?
Yes, I do.
Is it confidential, or can you share a little bit about what about the conversation, if it's not confidential?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's yeah. So let me explain just a little bit about my job. So yes, I report directly to the president. He is, and I am on the president's cabinet. I'm on way too many things. I'm on the president's cabinet. I'm on the president's council. I'm on the planning and priorities committee. I am on the people strategy and technology leadership team. So there are all those things. I also chair the president's advisory team for diversity and inclusion, and I help facilitate the president's BIPOC student advisory group. Right. So there's all those things. One of the things that I appreciate about my job, so if you're thinking of my title, it's Executive Associate to the President for Diversity and Inclusion. It is not Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, and that is intentional. Usually if someone is a Vice President, they are over a department or a sphere, right? A sector of the university. And if that were the case, all things diversity would come to me, and I would be the point person responsible for taking care of all diversity. The way that we have my position set up, and I say we because he and I were in conversation, developing the framework for this job before I even knew that I was going to apply for the job. It's like, I'm the dean, I'll help you figure this out. And then God prompted me to apply for the position. I was like, here we go. But my job, I have connections to all the other cabinet members. So there are 11 of us all together. I am part of my conversations with the president is how are the other vice presidents doing in their own level of cultural competency, their own diversity efforts within their division. So I meet monthly with the president and twice a month with the president, and I'm helping him to understand how are the other areas of how are all these other areas of the college is doing, how are these other senior executives doing in their own development. So that's one part of our conversation. Another part of our conversation is helping to develop the goals, the strategic goals, and we'll say these are the goals that are like at the 30,000 foot level for the university. How are we doing? What direction are we going to go? How are we defining diversity? How are we tracking it? So I developed the metrics to track our efforts, to define our efforts, and provide updates for our university, for the president, for the board of trustees, and our accrediting agencies as well. So that's part of it. Another part of my reporting to the president really has to do with, okay, so how are we doing? And when there are issues, pinch points, some of which make the news, I'm helping him to figure out a response. And how do we learn from this? How do we grow from this? And how do we get better? And I'm helping him in his own development as well. So not only am I holding all of our other cabinet members accountable, I'm holding him accountable as well. And he gives me permission to hold him accountable. Yeah. So he has to take assessments too. Yes, sir.
You and your co-author have positioned this book on the work of furthering diversity, equity, and inclusion in Christian organizations specifically. And
yes.
Of course, the work takes place in organizations, whether or not they have an explicit faith commitment. But as somebody who has been in Christian higher ed, can you talk a bit about the work in the Christian environment and how that is distinct for good or for ill in comparison with what might happen in a general organization? I would imagine it cuts both ways, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it cuts both ways. What I'm hearing more about, which is discouraging, that it can sometimes be easier to do diversity work in secular organizations than it is in Christian organizations. And that seems backwards. To me, it makes more sense because we are Christians, supposedly because we are trying our best to follow the command to love our neighbors as ourselves, because we should be seeking justice. This should be our motivation. This is what we do. And the world should be coming to the church to find out how to do this right. And that isn't always the case, right? Our advantage as Christians, or a high point for us, is because we do have a strong moral compass that is not dependent on the winds of change that are going on, right? We should be doing this work no matter what the demographic shift is going on. It's not about the numbers. It's not about the policies that a government is setting, right? We should be doing this work because we are trying to live into the commandment, to love God, and to love our neighbors as ourselves, because those are the first two commandments. And we should be ambassadors of reconciliation, reconciling all of creation, which includes not only our individual relationships with God, but our relationships with one another. We should be doing that work. Because people are different, there is diversity. So if we're going to be in the business of reconciling people together, we have to know how we are different. It shouldn't matter that we are different in terms of, can I see you as my sibling in Christ? It doesn't matter what we look like or the body that we're in. But I should, in my love for you and loving my neighbor, I should love you enough to want to know who you are and how you are doing it first. And if we are really taking this seriously, if I truly love you, I'm going to prefer you over to myself, but not to the point that I become a doormat and then I become oppressed. And so what we have going for us as Christians is that we have the gospel, we have the word of God. Where we get it twisted is we add our own interpretation, and sin creeps in. And what was meant to be something beautiful in relationship building is now creating dividing walls, right? That we're promoting ourselves, our individual selves, over other people, seeking our own well-being as opposed to seeking the well-being of others. So that to me is another difference in a secular organization. Because there's not this single moral compass, which we have as the gospel, there can be different ways of trying to interpret what do we mean by diversity, and what is, and how do we shape that conversation about diversity. And if the winds of time change, that conversation about what the beauty of diversity is shifts. In the Christian context, it shouldn't shift, but because we live in the world, sometimes we see that shift as well. As I said earlier, just even seeing the rise of this very, within Christian circles, this white nationalism that's rising up, right? My own personal belief, something is wrong with that message. If it's more exclusion than inclusion, something is wrong with the message, because God was so funny. That to me is the key point.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can you speak to what's happening in schools, preschool through 12, not higher education, schools, maybe work with some.
Yeah.
Could you speak up, please?
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
I'm asking about schools, preschool through 12th, and what's happening in schools these days, such as parents demanding that the curriculum be cleaned up
Oh, yeah.
and that offensive literature not be exposed to the kids.
Yeah.
And then you have the CRT, the critical race theory, and so on. So there's a lot going on in the local schools, Christian as well as secular, private.
So,
And can you speak to what we should be saying and reacting
Yeah.
to these instances?
that's such a good question. I wish it were the case that the concerns that we're hearing from K through 12 were really the concerns, right? What I think is happening is this increased resistance, this don't make my child feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. What I don't say, well, now it's going to be a live stream. What I want to say sometimes is like, well, if my kids can experience it and be uncomfortable, your kids should at least be able to know about it. And be uncomfortable, right? And I truly believe and say all the time, if we're doing this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion right, we are all going to be uncomfortable at some time. If you are doing this work and you feel comfortable all the time, you're not really doing the work. If I'm doing this work and I feel comfortable all the time, I'm not really doing the work. We are all going to have to go, ouch. We are all going to have to say, I'm going to have to let go of something in order to grab hold of what the better thing is that God is calling us to do. I think first of all, critical race theory is not taught in K through 12. It just is not. But what we've seen from this increased resistance in the name of protecting our kids is don't make my child feel uncomfortable. Don't make me feel uncomfortable. I'm tired of feeling guilty. My more cynical days, I don't want those people to have it any better than what they deserve to have, right? They're getting too much attention. So they're using words like critical race theory as the boogeyman to scare people into saying we've gone too far. As I said, critical race theory is not taught in grades K through 12. But people will say, because I share my experience as a Black woman, my true experience, not abstracting, not expounding on it and say this is what the trans is, but this is actually my experience that I experience microaggressions, that I have run into systemic racism, that I am proclaiming critical race theory. If I teach as a sociologist, if I teach about racism, real racism, right? The systemic nature of that's critical race theory. Jamar Tisby has been accused of teaching critical race theory, right? He's a historian. So yes, he's going to look at history. There's a movement out to ban Michelle Obama's book because it's critical race theory and it's divisive. She's telling her story of becoming who she is. Talking about race is not critical race theory. Talking about race brings about this awareness of who we are. So what I think we are seeing in K through 12, when we're seeing these calls about, we don't want this book, we don't want this book, don't teach my child critical race theory. It's like, okay, I won't teach your child critical race theory. I wasn't planning to do it anyway. I think it's kind of this fear mongering. And it is saying, well, I don't want to have to admit that maybe the system is broken and racist. Because if the system is broken and racist, now what are you going to do about it? So if I can say, no, it's not racist, the system is not broken, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to do anything about it. So if I just pretend it's okay, and if I take out all those horrible stories, why should anyone, everyone feels uncomfortable when we're talking about slavery. Yeah, I get that, but if we don't talk about slavery, we are doomed to repeat it and will fail to see the connections to mass incarceration. Because that's just modern slavery. The 13th Amendment allows for slavery as criminal punishment still in the United States. So that's why that's legal. If we don't know our past, we won't learn from it, and we'll be doomed to repeat it. So yeah, that's what, but at the same time, right, our schools are becoming more brown and black and yellow and red. Our schools we're seeing a decrease in white students just simply because white people aren't having as many babies as they used to have. So if you want to change that trend, that's what I used to tell my students, if you want to change that trend, y'all just need to have 20 babies now, right? It's like, no, okay, well, yeah, is that helpful? Yeah. But all schools are not like that. There are schools that are saying, no, we have to know our story. This is important, and seeing it for what it is. And honestly, I think it's just a few loud voices. It is not the whole. Because people really see, no, we have to learn about this, but we have to hear the concerns, speak to the concerns, but not let the loudest voice in the room take us on track. Yes, ma'am.
I just wondered, do you have anything to campaign that you can share regarding how both organizations and people can deal with when they try to address it and done it wrong?
Oh, yeah. That's such a good thing. And no one is perfect. And we're gonna get it wrong. People who mean well, intend well, it can go wrong. Because what might work and saying, hey, want to get to know you, let's hang out. That approach for one person might not work for the next person. So the first thing, if someone says either to an individual or an organization, we'll just simply talk about race. Oh, it's just racist, you're racist. Saying, that's hard for me to hear, but help me to understand what you mean. Help me to understand what happened, because clearly I missed something. And the only way that I'm going to get better is if I know. And so you just brace yourself for what someone has to say. And I would say it is, even if it sounds like it's too fantastic, that could not possibly be true, or it feels like they're over exaggerating what the issue is, there's probably a kernel of truth in there. Even if the whole thing is not true, there's probably a kernel of truth there. If you can come to a common understanding that that kernel of truth is something that we need to address and deal with, then we can do that journey together. I think also understand as individuals and organizations that sometimes by the time we hear there's a problem, it has been going on for a while. And what's best for the individual is for them to say, I got to transition out of here. Unfortunately, sometimes that's when we find out that how bad something is when someone leaves. That's why we recommend doing stay interviews or just kind of check-in interviews. How's it going? Can you tell me, how's it going for you? Is there anything that you have questions about? If it's for an organization doing a climate survey, that's anonymous for people to figure out, so people can report how things are going. And if people are reporting that something is off or something is wrong, something is harmful, follow up and make a corrective. What's worse is to do a survey, hear, I don't know, that there's all kinds of microaggressions that are going on, and then don't do anything about it. It's like, oh, that's so bad. We should do better. But there's no corrective intervention to happen. So own it, make it corrective, and play the long game. I have learned that, I preach that, play the long game. We want things to change quickly. I get that. I want things to change quickly as well. But sometimes you cannot change any faster than an organization has capacity to change. You cannot change any faster than an individual has capacity to change. And so there's a lot of unlearning that has to happen. There's a lot of learning that has to happen. There's a lot of trust that has to be built. There's vulnerability that has to be expressed. And you just keep going. So you play the long game. If you're expecting, this organization has done X, and it is horrible, that you just go running up to the president's door, chaining yourself to the president's door until something changes, you're gonna be there a long time. Because organizations don't change that fast, right? But you play the long game, and not play the long game, well, we'll just wait till Jesus comes back and it'll all be better. But we play the long game, making those efforts, finding out how do policies change, what needs to happen, who needs to know, who needs to be involved, who needs to be moved off of the committee eventually, who needs to be brought on, how do things actually change? Work the system to bring about the change. And just be mindful that, yeah, not everybody who's smiling is happy or is doing it. Right? So we just have conversations. Is that helpful? Yes.
Hi, I didn't get an opportunity to read the book, but if you could just give me some insight on which play in the Playbook would you recommend, what's the benchmark? That's probably more of the question. What would you say was the best approach? And then the second question to that, what would be the most common pitfall that somebody's or organization has fell into, trying to be intentional?
Well, let me start with common pitfalls. Most common pitfall is not resourcing the initiatives, right? So you hire a chief diversity officer, they have no budget, they have no real voice at the table. They might not even have an office, for real. So saying you want change, hiring a person to be that view, but they're not equipped to succeed. I've seen that happen. Another pitfall is saying you want change, but you really don't. You want diversity, but you don't want what comes with diversity. What comes with diversity, not just beautifully colored faces around the table. What comes with diversity are cultural differences that can be exciting, but if we ignore them, it's gonna be chaos, right? So what is a benchmark? Understand where you actually are and what are the concerns. I would, for anyone organization, I would say who's just starting, do a cultural audit. Bring and have people from the outside, someone from the outside that's credible to come in to do an audit on what you're doing. Because inside we could be thinking, well, 5 years ago, we weren't doing this well and pat ourselves on the back. We're good. Or look at this diverse group of people we just hired in last year. We're good. And we've never heard any complaints. Well, you don't have a complaint reporting system in place. So of course you have never heard a complaint, right? But have a cultural audit that comes in to see how you're actually doing. From that audit, develop a plan, a strategic action plan and then actually do it. For individuals, say, be honest with yourself about where your biases are. Be honest with yourself. If you have trusted colleagues or family members, ask them how you are doing. There are a number of assessments that are out there. An assessment that I really recommend is the Intercultural Development Inventory. You need to find a qualified administrator. I'm one, a qualified administrator to do the IDI. But this Intercultural Development Inventory, what it does, it helps you to understand what is your orientation towards engaging commonalities and differences. So what is your kind of default when you are in an environment, there's commonalities and differences. Every time we get people together, there are commonalities and differences. What is your default in engaging that? And it gives you an honest assessment about where you are. Kind of like a reality check. I tell people there's the weight that we think we are, and then we go to the doctor's office and get on the scale. And it's like, oh, it's less than what I thought it was, or it's more than what I thought it was, right? But it's that objective measure. And with the IDI, when you take that, you not only get a profile about where you are along the development continuum, but you also get a development plan as well. So that can help you uncover what are the next steps in order to increase your awareness, your knowledge, eventually your skills to better engage commonalities. Yes.
I'm curious, number of authors I've talked to say that the process of writing opens up new things about the topic that they're writing on. And I'm wondering if in the process of putting this together, you found yourself grabbing onto a new idea or a new perspective as you were writing.
Such a good question. I would say not so much a new idea, but our shift model that's in there, this framework for advancing change, that was something that we developed. So thinking about, what's a way of thinking of, what's a way of creating a framework that encourages, that gives a playbook for initiating change that's not something else that's already out there. So having to think about it differently, I think maybe that was the new learning, and that was exciting. It's like, how about this? And how about put it in a circle? Yes. Because it just keeps going on, right? And so that understanding, this is a model for us, more relatable, but not someone else's model that's out there. So that I think was more the new learning, and it was fun actually writing down, writing that chapter, thanks but no thanks, because it's something we had often talked about, and not just with Michelle, but I've talked with other diversity professionals or other people as well, how there are sometimes people who, some are trying to help and they just mess stuff up. Some are not trying to help and they know they're not trying to help, but I've never seen anyone write about that. So to actually write it, put it down, and to talk about the differences between an ally and a co-conspirator, and then how sometimes the people that we meet around us aren't allies and co-conspirators, we just need friends. We just need friends that are around us who can engage us with topics that are not diversity related, right? My best friend, what we enjoy doing when we're together is watching Godzilla movies, right? I mean, it has absolutely nothing to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has nothing to do with higher education, has nothing to do with Christian organizations. We just like watching the old Godzilla movies because the perspective always changes. Sometimes Godzilla is standing on top of the water. Sometimes he's standing in the water. Sometimes he's as tall as 20 stories. Sometimes he's just 10 feet tall. We just like watching all these. So, yeah, so that was fun to actually write that out about the different kinds of people that we meet around us, as well as letting people know that you might not be helping, and this is what it looks like when you're not helping. Yes.
How do you respond as a diversity professional to white defensiveness?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I could say, oh, I never have to deal with that. What I try to do is figure out what's underneath the defensiveness. Right? So someone is, whether it's the phone call, does Calvin teach critical race theory? What's Calvin's position on critical race theory? We don't have a position on critical race theory. But I try to figure out, so what's underneath that? Where's the fear? Where's the concern? If I understand the fear, I can address the fear. I also try to find places of commonality or concern. Let me give you a vague example. I had a mother of a student call regarding her daughter's experience, and her daughter was coming face to face with the reality of race and racism, right? So coming face to face with that. The mother was upset. Where I was able to connect was to say, as a mother, I'm concerned about my children. I can really hear you love your child, you love your daughter, and you want this to be a great experience. So because I could make that connection, we could get on the same page about wanting the best experience for her daughter. Okay, now let's unpack this hurt that you feel she has experienced. Now let me give you a different lens on what that is. So finding a point of connection, finding out where the fear is or the harm that's been done, offering a remedy for the harm, because harm, offering a remedy for that, but also being clear that racism is a thing and racism is real, right? So I didn't tell her that, but yeah, my child can experience racism, your child can learn about it, right? But finding those points of connection. I say that within a context of understanding that someone wants to understand, because someone can be defensive, but they just don't have the right words, and they're concerned, and they're looking for dialogue and a conversation. If someone wants to have a dialogue and a conversation, whether it's one conversation or a series of conversations, they're wanting the dialogue because they really want to understand. I will walk with you. Let's do this. But if someone is just defensive, and the defensiveness is just anger and an intolerance for who I am, and really doesn't want to listen or have a conversation, they just want to yell and call me everything but a child of God. I don't have to listen to you, right? So that kind of defensiveness as part of my own self-care, because I'm close enough to retirement that I got nothing to prove. No, I will not put myself in that position. So in that regards, it's thank you for sharing your concern, but I cannot continue this conversation.
Thanks.
It's amazing what people feel like they're entitled to say to you. It's like, oh, no, you think you're wrong. Anything else? I don't want to keep you longer than what you were intending to say. We're just about, finished up for our time, but I do want to say thank you. I'll hang around just for a couple minutes. Grab a pen, grab a hand sanitizer, because, they say diversity playbook and have all that thing going. If you have not purchased the book, please encourage the book. Be like my sister here and get books for your church. Yes, that is amazing. My church has a book as well, and they are working through the book as well. So, but thank you so much. I really do appreciate you coming out. This is